everyone, today you will hear an interesting story. It was the winter. My wife and I lived upstate. Couldn't help escape the crude, friend Paul who lived not far down the street from us. We decided to spend the weekend hunting. My wife, as usual, packed us a snack and wished us to be careful and gave me a kiss before we left. We packed our gear and headed out into the snowy expanse of the local woods. We had lived here since we were born, and since childhood we had developed a love of hunting. I preferred to hunt birds, while Paul liked larger prey and most often shot deer. We wandered back and forth with breaks for a few hours, until finally, during one of the breaks, we spotted a four-legged carcass with antlers between the trees. Paul softly uttered, "Looks like I'm having a good day," and nestled behind a lying thick trunk of a once-fallen tree, took aim. There was a shot that broke the silence. The animal staggered slightly and collapsed on the snow-covered ground. Paul's eyes sparkled with joy, and we went closer to the trophy. The animal was no longer breathing. Once I helped wrap it in a cloth, we carried it to the car. Later, I managed to shoot some birds, and by evening, we had already made a fire. I got a flask of whiskey from the glove compartment, and we put the game on skewers and spent the evening relaxing around the fire and enjoying the roasted meat. We returned home the following evening. Stephanie, my wife, congratulated us on our catch. I handed her the game, and she carried everything into the kitchen. I invited Paul to stay with me a little while longer. My wife immediately began plucking the birds, and soon the mouth-watering aroma of the fried carcasses she made in her special recipe was wafting from the kitchen. On appetite, Stephanie served a large platter of meat on the table. "Steph, you are wonderful. Your dishes are delicious," I said, having always admired her recipes. "My wife can't do that," I added. "That's too bad," I continued. "Maybe you could teach her." Stephanie smiled and nodded in acknowledgement.
Thank you, Paul. It makes me feel good to be appreciated so much.
We began our meal, enjoying every bite of the succulent meat. A bottle of wine was on its way, and the atmosphere became more and more relaxed and friendly. We talked and laughed at the jokes Paul told us, which he was good at. "John, you really are a lucky man," Paul said as he poured himself another glass of wine, and there was even a hint of envy in his voice. "You've such a beautiful wife who cooks so wonderfully. I'd be very happy if I were you." "Yes, that's true." I looked at her appreciatively. She was dressed up for the party tonight, and she looked just gorgeous, even despite her age. But as the evening drew to a close, I went out for a smoke on the porch, waiting for Paul to gather. Through the ajar door, I noticed that he was too grateful to say goodbye to Stephanie, reaching over to her with hugs and kisses. He's about to go over and bring him to his senses, but Stephanie deftly got away from him. "Don't mind him," she said to my remark when Paul left our house. "We'll talk to him when he sobers up. Anyway, what about Mark? Didn't he call?" Mark was our grown-up son, off to college in another state.
No, he didn't.
The next day, on my lunch break, I went to the local post office where Paul worked as a forwarder and soon found him. "John, what's the matter with you?"
"Oh, we had a few too many drinks."
"Oh, come on. He tried to apologize in a peculiar way when we went out for a smoke break, and I reprimanded him for his inappropriate behavior last night. I pardoned him this time and soon went back to work. The days went on as boringly as usual. It wasn't long before winter break started, and Mark came to visit us to rest from his studies. What a grown-up you've become these months. I hugged my son and patted his shoulders when he arrived. Tell me about it, he said. Well, it's a lot warmer than here. It's pretty cool though. Mark told us about student life, the teachers, and about the girl he met there and started dating. Why didn't you invite her over?
We have plenty of room.
Some other time, Mark answered. We continued the evening over dinner. The next day, Paul came to see me again. We had agreed beforehand that we would go hunting, this time the three of us. I decided to take Mark with me. It didn't take long to pack, and soon we were wandering through the woods again in search of a trophy. Suddenly, Paul fell to the ground and groaned loudly. What's the matter, Paul? I ran up to him. I think I twisted my ankle, he said, grasping his ankle and moaning. How could it be? You're always so careful, I said, agitated. While we wrapped a bandage around his ankle, we decided we couldn't stay there any longer and had to go home and take Paul to the hospital. But Paul insisted that my son and I shouldn't interrupt our vacation because of him. After all, Mark is rarely home now anyway. I agreed and we decided to take Paul into town. Mark drove him and I stayed to watch our hastily set up camp. When my son came back, he reported that Paul had stayed at our house. He said it was the way he asked, like it was closer and he didn't want to get stuck in the hospital. Stephanie, who used to work as a nurse, agreed to give first aid. I, of course, was very embarrassed by this decision, but my son persuaded me that it was okay, and he and I proceeded to hunt. When I got home, I had an unpleasant surprise. What is he still doing here? I asked my wife. How so? He's injured. He couldn't drive with that leg. Well, no, that's too much. Mark, you should have done what I said, not listen to him. Come on, Paul. You should have been home a long time ago. I walked him to his car and drove him home. It was dark and empty. Paul explained that his wife had gone to visit her parents for a few days and apologized again for his excessive presence at my house. As I was reluctant to believe his innocence, something inside suggested that Paul wasn't being very honest with me right now, but his words seemed logical, and I helped him get settled into the house. Oh, what have you been up to lately? Have you lost your mind in your old age? What kind of stupid jealousy? My wife came at me with a stern look when I got home. I just looked at her reproachfully and wandered off to another room. I couldn't stop thinking about why Paul had stayed at our house for so long. And Stephanie was so protective of him. Maybe I was being paranoid, but I don't seem to be. I'm not sane now. But the devil on my shoulder kept whispering that I was missing something. So a few more days went by like that. Christmas was coming up. Stephanie prepared all the snacks she could think of with the provisions. Paul showed up on Christmas Eve with a bottle of wine, explaining that his wife had gone to her parents for the holiday and he hadn't spoken to them since the last fight, and asked to celebrate with us Jackson. Though one objected, but on the contrary, it seemed to be more fun. Already at the table, Paul was infecting us with his jokes again, The fun was heating up. Later, I went out for a smoke. My son came up to me and asked what I thought was a strange question at the time. "Is everything okay with you and Mom?" "Yes, everything is fine." "Why do you ask?" "I don't know." He sat down on the porch next to me. From the outside, it seems like you're not as close as you used to be. Don't. We've lived together for years, and we're not so young anymore, but that doesn't mean we don't love each other. I put my arm around his shoulders and leaned him against me, discarding my cigarette. Suddenly my phone rang. I looked to see that it was from my work and let my son know I needed to talk. He went back inside and I answered it. It was my supervisor, and he asked me to come out for my shift tomorrow morning because one of the workers was very sick. Although I didn't feel like it, after wrinkling my nose, I agreed. I had to. After all, I used to swap shifts too. It looked like I would have to stop drinking for today, so I wouldn't have to come to work tomorrow in a wrinkled state. I was on my way back to the house when my son ran out to meet me with googly eyes. "Dad," he said, "come on, a patient. You need to see this." I thought something terrible had happened, so I rushed after him into the house. When we walked into the dining room where they were celebrating, I saw a truly horrifying picture. Stephanie and Paul had been drinking heavily that night, and they were very drunk as a result. But that wasn't all. About a case of crumbs, I stood and watched as they collapsed, cuddled up on the couch next to each other. "You son of a bitch," I said, furious at what I saw. I jumped up to them in one fell swoop and grabbed Paul by the scruff of the neck. He tried to mumble something to me, then called me Sweet Steph. It pissed me off, so I punched him in the face a few times. Mark, who was standing nearby, tried to calm me down and separate us because Paul was starting to come to his senses and tried to fight me back. The fight didn't last long, and from a tender piece, Mark managed to get me to stop. But I wanted to push the bastard out of the house. He clung to his legs time and again, but still managed to hold on. He slipped and fell a few times in the yard, but he made it to the gate. Mark and I stood on the doorstep, and I yelled at him to never set foot in my house again. "Don't you get it?" I said. "She loves me. She's been in love with me for a long time." The drunken Paul shouted one last time as he stood outside the gate. I heard it and wanted to chase him again, but Mark stopped me, gripping my arm tightly. I listened to his advice that it would do no good now. We went back into the house. Now I had to hear an explanation from my wife. Mark was sitting next to me, apparently watching me, afraid that I wouldn't lose my temper again. I assured him, though, that I wouldn't do anything bad to his mother. He, too, was shocked by his mother's behavior. I'm so ashamed," she finally said, stammering. "I didn't expect this from you." Mark finally accepted the truth of what was happening. I felt so sorry for my son because of what he'd seen. I was no longer as disgusted by my wife's betrayal as I was by her doing it in front of my son. I felt like I'd been covered in mud all over. I couldn't forgive Stephanie for what she had done, and I couldn't forgive Paul for betraying our long friendship. My thoughts were all jumbled up. I looked at my son with regret and went outside for a smoke. Mark seemed to guess that things weren't going so smoothly between us. But I couldn't have guessed that myself. At that moment, I just wanted to go to hell. But I had to act. Life didn't stop there. And then there's tomorrow's shift. Somehow I fell asleep, sleeping on the couch this time. It's in the morning. Having packed early, I did not wait for my wife to wake up and hurry to leave the house. To depth for Patience, it was only with Mark, who was also up early, that I talked for a while, saying that everything would work out. Those all-day-long thoughts of last night did not leave me. I kept finally waiting until the end of the workday. I began to get ready to go home. Moving small things from the pocket of my work clothes into my jacket. My cell phone was in my hand. I twirled it around a bit and dialed the number. "Hi, Paul. How are you doing? How are you feeling?" "Oh man, I feel like I've been hit by a truck. What happened last night? I don't remember anything after the third drink. A good thing I didn't have to go to work today." That's a good answer for me right now. "Just so. We danced a little. I got the day off now. Let's go hunting." "Okay. Is Mark coming with us?" "No. He's leaving tomorrow and he needs his rest. It's just the two of us." "All right then. Then I'll come over." "No. I'll pick you up." We drove with him again to our place, where usually no one was hanging around but us. And once again he was lucky enough to get a deer. It was a fat one with branching, pointed antlers. Paul and I went over to admire it. He leaned in, as usual, to get a closer look at it. "Khan, I have a question for you." "Yes. I'm listening to you very carefully." He turned his head toward me. "How long have you been sleeping with my wife?" I didn't understand. I told him what really happened that night. Paul seemed to realize that his affair with Stephanie had been discovered and confessed that they had been seeing each other in secret for over a year. But he just didn't want to tell me so as not to hurt our friendship. "You call this friendship? I couldn't stand it. You betrayed me with my wife. You both wiped your feet on me." He wanted to contradict me, and I noticed that he was trying to point the gun at me, but I hit him with all my might. Paul went down. I saw the ends of the animal's sharp horns protruding from his belly and blood pouring into the snow around him. I realized that I didn't even feel sorry for him. I left him there alone, bleeding. When I got home, I still dialed 911 and reported the accident, but I couldn't call earlier because my phone was dead. Stephanie was upset when she found out, but I didn't care about her feelings. Mark had talked to her in my absence, and it looked like he was in a lot of pain to be around her. This time he packed more things before he left, letting her know he was unlikely to ever come back here. I, in turn, after my son's departure, packed up and left home too, leaving Stephanie alone to feel what it's like to have loved ones turn their backs on you. Dear listeners, your support is very important to us. If you like our story, please like, comment, and subscribe. It's very motivating to us. We need your feedback to improve our content.